we had a very interesting discussion on Monday. What I took from that discussion was that an awful lot depends on intentionality of the relationships. You can't just assume that they're going to take place. And an awful lot has to be related to the structure of how those relationships are organized and coordinated. And there's also the whole issue of the fact that students and teachers are organized in blocks. And I'm hoping to hear a bit more about that this time. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Angela and her team for this second session. Really looking forward to it.
Perfect. And actually, I'll start. Janice, if you want to go through some logistics, and then I'll kick it off.
Perfect. Thank you, Angie. Yeah, we wanted to welcome you back to the second second webinar in this series. So again, I'm Janice Eldridge, the Barr Director of Schools. And we're really excited to continue our conversations about why relationships matter. Today, we're going to zoom in on staff to student relationships. And if you want to go ahead to the next slide, Ari, we'll just do a quick introduction of the folks with us. You'll recognize some of us from Monday. Angela Jarabek, our Executive Director, Anu Sharma, our Senior Research Scientist, Rob Metz, our Deputy Director, myself, Beth Heimer, our Associate Director of Elementary Schools. Joining us today is one of our Barr coaches, Tony Bland. He works with the school that we're featuring today, Stoughton International School, and we have the headmaster of that school, Jean Roundtree, with us, and also the Director of Data and Student Achievement, Raquel Martinez. So we're excited to have them with us today, and you'll get to hear a little bit about their work specifically in the school. And Howard, your question is very pertinent because they've been with us for, I think this is year 4 maybe, and have definitely worked through some difficult staff issues as they have spread Barr up through grades. So they'll have a chance to talk about that in a few minutes. So we are recording this. We will stop again for questions like we did on Monday, but feel free to pop them in the chat and I will keep an eye on that. And with that, I will turn it over to Angie.
Well, I'm really excited to be here. I'm very happy. I've been talking to Howard for about 6 months about our work, and it's always exciting to be able to share our work as well as hear from our schools. So what I actually want to do is ground us a little bit in where this model came from, as well as Janice is going to explain the model a bit before we dig into some of the research we're going to share now. So the story is this. I was a high school counselor, and I was assigned to work with 9th grade students in a school right outside of Minneapolis. And my first 5 years there, half the kids failed a class. And I was trying to do everything that I knew to have them succeed. And they continued to fail. So I went to the principal at the time to say, I think I should quit. I think I should resign. Clearly, I'm not getting this job done. And the principal was really empowering and said, it's not just you, it's not just our school, this is a problem across our country, that, you know, a lot of our students aren't being successful in the system, and come up with a different system to do high school. So what I will say, which is interesting, is sometimes when you're really young and you don't know things are supposed to be hard, you're like, well, that makes a lot more sense. This system does not seem to be working. So that's really what Barr is, this new kind of infusion of a new system that came from practitioners. Now, the other piece that you'll see is we've always had evaluators with us, external evaluators, to be able to assess if what we're doing was making a difference. So the Barr model is predicated on 2 pillars. One is building positive, intentional relationships. And you will hear about that over and over again, but this intentionality that Howard talked about. And that has to be both from staff to students, staff to staff, which we talked about a lot on Monday, as well as student to student. The second pillar is data. You have to have transparency in data, and we all have to be level set on what data are we actually watching, what data do we believe, and how can we make sure that all the adults who are working with that student has access to that data. The other piece is qualitative data, that we need to make sure that all of the adults are looking for all those things to really say, who is this student besides just a number, besides just attendance? So we need to get better at training our adults to be capturing that qualitative data and then have those transparent ways of sharing that so we can move forward. So the Barr model, within the first year, our failure rate got cut in half. And over the next 10 years, our failure rate not only stayed cut in half, but we had students exponentially doing better, especially Black, Latinx, and low-income students. We're taking honors courses at an incredibly high rate, and you will be seeing that data later. But I kept thinking this system should not be specific to Minneapolis. It also shouldn't be specific to 9th grade, but this should work other places. So as you will hear, we then devoted a lot of time to making sure that this worked across the country and in a variety of settings. And that is both how the origination of how this came from a practitioner vantage point, as well as from teachers and educators, but then how the evaluation moved things forward. With that, I'm going to have Janice talk just a little bit about kind of what BAR looks like from the ground.
Sandy. So this is an image to help you visualize what a week in BAR would look like in an average school setting. And one thing that's important to note is this is a 3-year model, and we provide unlimited coaching to our schools. Knowing that this is a systems change, this is not, another intervention that schools take on. It really is a systems change and a way of changing adults' thinking about education. It does take 3 years to get to that full fidelity in the model. But this is an image of what it would look like on a weekly basis. And we do ask schools to nominate a BAR coordinator who is part of their staff to oversee this work kind of on the ground. And that's who we provide the coaching to. So some of the pieces that would happen in a week would be a U time or an I time. So in an elementary school, we call it U time. In a secondary school, we call it I time. And the U or the I really indicates it's all about the student. This is the socio-emotional curriculum that's done on a weekly basis by their core teachers. And it's done during that core class time. And when we say core classes, we refer to the science, the math, the social studies, and the English. And so those teachers rotate teaching these I times during their class time. And for the students, that really says that these social emotional skills are just as important as that chemistry lab, or as that reading lesson, or as the other content that we're teaching them. We want them to have these other skills. It also says to them that we want to build that relationship with them, that we care about how they are doing. We care about their goals, their lives, what's happening. And so it's this relationship building curriculum that is able to be done by all teachers with their students. It also helps the student-to-student relationship as they're learning to engage in group work and share with each other and start to have conversations with each other. The next piece is really the small block and the big block, which go together. They look different in elementary and secondary, but really the purpose of those is for teachers to get together and be having conversations. And then the next piece is the risk review, and that's for students that are having, students that are in crisis or are having concerns that are outside of the scope of the work of the teacher. And those would go to risk review. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the block meetings and the risk review. Ari, if you want to go to the next slide. So this is just a picture of what a small block meeting might look like during the week. At the secondary level, what a small block looks like is we have teachers coming together with their BAR coordinator, and really they're discussing and sharing about how students are doing. And so really each person is bringing their perspective of that student, and they're able to, in a collaborative, strength-based, intentional way, share about how students are doing, set goals for students, set interventions, and then check back in this continuous process to see if those goals are met. Is the student improving? Are we seeing the outcomes that we would like to see? And it's a great collaborative process, because say I'm really struggling with a student, but Angie is having great success with that student. She can share with me what she's doing with that student, and I can start to do that in my classroom. So it takes a lot of trust and collaboration among these teachers to be able to do this work. They're also looking at data on a regular basis, and we're teaching them how to look at data. At least in America, teachers aren't often the ones digging into data. It's often done at higher levels. And so we're really teaching them, what does it look like for you to be empowered to have those data discussions and for you to be the solution finders, rather than things coming down to you. You can start to say, why do we have such a high failure rate? What can we do about that? Why are kids getting kicked out of class? What do our discipline numbers look like? And so they're engaging these really important conversations about data. In the big block meeting, they're joined by counselors and administrators to really broaden these conversations. So it really is a multiple perspective meeting so that we can get counseling assistance if we need it. The administrators can come in and provide the perspective they have or the support that they can give. And it really is that collaborative meeting of getting all of the right minds at the table to do what's best for the students. Then a separate meeting would be risk review. And this generally does not involve the teachers. This involves the counselors, the social workers, the administrators. And this is for students who are in an immediate crisis or students who have issues that are outside the scope of what the teachers can help them with. So an example of that would be if the student is homeless or if they have a substance abuse problem, or even if they had a parent die over the weekend and they're in crisis. That risk review team would really take that kid into their fold, and they would really look after that after that student. So what we find is that teachers, because they want to help students so much, they often spend all of their time on students that they don't actually have the capacity to help, that 5 to 10% of students who should be on risk review. And this frees them up. They can now work with the other 90% of students and let risk review really care for these students that have these more critical and overwhelming concerns, and also partner with the community to get students the help they need. For instance, if they are homeless, can we partner with a homeless shelter? Can we partner with a food bank to get the students the kind of help that they really need? So that's really what a week in bar would look like in a school. So it is really a systems change and a different way of looking at things, and a way of doing things collaboratively instead of thinking about, a teacher doing things separately from a counselor, from an administrator. So I'll stop there a second and ask if there's any questions about that before I hand it over to Anu.
Janice, Christopher has a question.
Oh, thank you, Christopher.
Hi, I hope you can all hear me. The
Yes.
Internet is, the weather here is dreadful, and the internet goes funny when the weather's bad. I'm sorry I missed the first seminar on Monday, but I have read up on the stuff, and it's very impressive and very interesting and very compatible with work that I've been doing for the last 10 years. Some of which has taken place with Howard Sharon, who's also at the meeting. One of the things I'm very impressed with is your use of the word data. I think data is very important. Data for me is evidence. And one of the things that I may be able to contribute to some of your participants, we've developed a way of analyzing data very simply to identify the risky children or risky young people about 2 years before the trouble arises. Because what we found, certainly in the UK, and I've worked on a European project in different EU locations, is that what equals risk in one location is not the same as risk in another. So in some areas, for example, I worked in an area called West Bromwich, which is in the West Midlands of England, and there was an extremely good service for young carers, which is traditionally a risk factor for children not making it through high school. Because they had a very good service, that was not a risk in West Bromwich. However, in other areas, things like not having any access to transport, or as you mentioned, homelessness or hunger, they were areas which were very important. I just sort of want to throw that in because analysing the risk factors in one area, what we found is you cannot generalise that to another area with a high degree of accuracy. So the question is, what kind of data do you collect?
I'll take that briefly, Christopher, and then Anu, I think this is a beautiful segue to your piece. Christopher, our piece, once again, is very much site-specific. So we're working with 170 schools across the country. Some are rural, some are small, some are urban. You're going to hear from our schools in Boston. So both are what is assessed as being a risk, as well as what's assessed as being success, is very site specific. So we go to the school to say, what do you value? What are the things that you are seeing as both risk issues? And then what is the data that you have to be able to assess that? So we have some standardized things that our country utilizes that we have some calibration. So for example, passing coursework is one that we often impose because that we see as consistent, but we really make those very kind of unique to the setting to say both what do you see as being a risk in terms of your students, but then we make sure that they do have evidence that those risks do kind of yield the concerns. But it's a great question, and we did. And we can share more, but we have done 12 within school randomized control trials in incredibly varied settings intentionally for that. So we went to big kind of bureaucratic districts. We went to small rural to be able to make sure the model would hold. And I think a lot of that has to do with really having a sensitivity to local context. So our coaches are trained to make sure that they really spend a lot of time to make sure that we're addressing the needs that the school sees versus imposing a need or saying that this is a risk factor when in fact it's not. So I think
exactly. Sorry, you're singing my song, or maybe I'm singing.
I'm so glad.
It's
Perfect.
so similar to the work.
Wonderful. And
I've been promoting in the UK, and I said that across some various EU locations. What you might be interested in is the very simple method that we've developed to identify the local risk factors. And like you, we've achieved, I think, really quite spectacular results in a wide range of locations. But if there's some, I don't want to lock up. This is not my seminar; it's your seminar. But if you're interested, I can
that sounds
certainly
great.
give you. There are a couple of books that we've contributed on the subject, and there's some papers. But we've also had an externally evaluated it's the Erasmus project, which is a European thing, and we are getting very similar findings. It's a great idea. It's a great project.
Perfect. Well, Howard, I'm confident you'll connect to Christopher and our team afterwards. And I do see your one question, Howard. I'm going to have Anu go first, and then we'll come back to the small block meetings because I actually feel like we're going to be able to address that when we talk a little bit in terms of Boston's work. But Howard, I see you, so don't know that I've seen your question. But Anu, I'm going to have you go a little bit to talk about the data.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Angie. Thank you, Janice. And thank you, Christopher, for starting this off and being interactive with us, which is exactly how we like it, especially when we have the luxury of a small group. And we are, my colleague, Marianne Corsello, who is also one of the senior researchers on the team, is on this call. And I saw her leaning forward as you said, if we have some books and papers that we can share, we would really be interested in reading those. Well, again, as Angie mentioned, my name is Anu Sharma, and I have been with BAR since the beginning. When Angie first started BAR, the funding source at the time, which was the state of Minnesota here in the United States, it had a requirement that the program be evaluated externally. That is, by somebody not directly affiliated with the program. I was working for a nonprofit organization at the time named the Minnesota Institute of Public Health, and my supervisor assigned me the role of evaluating this program. And truly, I had no idea that 20 years later, I would have the privilege of talking about 2 decades of research supporting BAR and relationships. My focus today, after I just briefly go through some of the results that we mentioned on Monday, will be to highlight some of the results that we've seen in teachers. So here's our research at a glance. We have conducted to date 12 within school randomized controlled trials, although there is currently a study going on with 66 schools that are not within school, but across school. But we have so far got the data from 12 within school randomized controlled trials, and we conducted those for 1 year in the schools in the states of Minnesota, California, Maine, Kentucky, and Texas. 4,723 students, 149 teachers participated in these studies. Now, the vast majority of students in these schools were students of color and eligible for free and reduced lunch, which is our best proxy for poverty. Students were randomly assigned in each school to either BAR or business as usual. And on the last green portion of this slide, you'll see that the outcome measures, we looked at credits earned, passing courses, standardized achievement test scores, and student and teacher perceptions. And our question was very simple. Did BAR students and teachers do better than non-BAR? The next slide shows you our federal funds that resulted in these, that showed these results. The federal funds that we received were termed Investing in Innovation, or I3. And we tested the model in a randomized controlled trial at a Hemet High School in California. This secondary school is outside Los Angeles, and those data are on this slide. Failure rates, which is the number of students failing one or more courses, went down over time, and that was the case for all students and Hispanic students. We took a look at achievement test scores, and those are on the right. In both reading and math, BAR students in blue, they did better than non-BAR students who are in green. Because of the success, and if we could move to the next slide, we received additional federal funds to validate the model in other schools. We conducted 11 more randomized controlled trials in schools across the country. Once again, failure rates for BAR students in dark blue were always lower than non-BAR students in light blue. And that was the case for the full sample: girls, boys, minority students, and white students. And when I say better, I should clarify that in all these slides, those were statistically significant differences. The next slide shows our, what we call our theory of change, or our mediation analysis. And the question is, what are we doing? You've heard a little bit about that, but what are we doing in terms of relationships? The American Institutes of Research, AIR, our external evaluator for these randomized control trials, conducted something called a mediation analysis. That's a way for me of saying, let's look in the black box and see how things really work. You'll see that we first work with teachers to change their attitudes. And today, I would like to highlight the results of a teacher survey that was conducted by AIR in the randomized control trial. So we start with teachers, which is what I'll highlight today. We move to students, student attitudes and behaviors, and then we get those academic outcomes. AIR sent an online teacher survey at the end of the randomized control trial year to BAR and control teachers. If you could move to the next slide, please. The 113 teachers participated in this survey. The survey items were developed from several validated protocols, and some items were created specifically for this particular evaluation. And this slide shows definitions of the first several constructs that we measured. We measured teacher collaboration and view of colleagues. So that's teachers working together, trusting each other, having shared responsibilities. Teacher use of data, do they have, which, thank you, we've already had a small introduction for that, to that. Access to data, discussing data, and using data to differentiate instruction. View of the school supports, do they feel that the schools provides them with necessary resources and support services? Self-efficacy, do they believe they have the ability and the power to affect learning, motivation, and behavior? Next slide, please. These are the last four constructs. How do they perceive student behavior, commitment, and attitudes? What do they think students would do to help peers or make the right choices? And then what they actually observe, their view of students' actual behavior, commitments, and attitudes. What teachers observe students doing in classrooms related to goal setting, motivation, and work completion. Interacting with parents, do they feel confident engaging with parents and helping them understand what students need? And view of student accountability. Do they believe that students are accountable for their own learning and grades and meeting deadlines? Next slide shows some of the significant results that we got on the teacher survey between BAR and control teachers. So when those two groups were compared, we see that in 6 of these 8 survey constructs, we have statistically significant differences between BAR and control teachers. These scale scores are presented here. They are standardized to a mean of 50 and a standard deviation of 10. And the statistically significant results occurred on teacher collaboration, use of data, view of the school support, self-efficacy, and perceived student behavior, and view of students' actual behavior. Next slide, please. In their own words, let's hear what they said regarding how they experienced these constructs. So the first construct, teacher collaboration. Meeting with the BAR team, this is a teacher in California, has significantly changed my teaching. I think it's so neat. I feel like it needs to be a class, like school meeting with teachers. It's been super helpful. You have other teachers to rely on, and it's not just you doing it alone. I think you'll hear that that is a constant theme in BAR, that teachers are not siloed, they do things together, teacher collaboration. The next slide talks about teacher use of data. They report significantly higher use of data to inform decisions versus control teachers. It's prescriptive. That's what one teacher in Kentucky described as the best word for it. Imagine you're the doctor sitting back. You see symptoms, they're talking about students. You come up with a plan, and then you go practice that plan. And then the teacher goes on to say, it's tough for us to try to make a kid better, improve a kid with a prescriptive method, but then have no results. So they're talking exactly about the fact that if they don't have success, this is not fun for them. Results matter. We're going to have our results. Christopher, I see you nodding. Thank you for that reinforcement. The next quote, the next construct, is view of the school support. And my coworker, Rob Metz, who is a former headmaster and principal and superintendent, along with Jean Roundtree, can talk about the importance of their role as administrators in supporting the BAR model. But BAR teachers reported feeling significantly more support than control. The administration was hugely supportive of anything that we needed, resource-wise or anything else, provided opportunities for us to have out-of-business hour plan meetings. They would give us a day where they would pay for substitutes to come into all of our classrooms where we would have these planning meetings. Very, very supportive through the whole thing. The next construct, teacher self-efficacy. Do they feel like they can make a difference? And BAR teachers feel like that they do. I feel like a different teacher. I feel like my relationships with students are different. I feel like I've been able to create different connections with students than I have with in the past. I still teach the same math, same teacher, same results. I'm sorry, different results, same curriculum, same students. I still teach the same math, but the students are growing much more than they would have in the past as people, which is huge. The next construct, in teachers' words, perception of students' behavior. They believe that students would, in fact, change their behaviors. The group of students in the BAR program definitely seem like they're more positive. They still deal with a lot of the same issues that my last year students dealt with, but they're more open about it with me than my other kids. They have a closer group of friends, it seems like, than I see in the classroom at least. So I feel like that was a big change from last year too. And the last one, which is view of students' actual behavior. They reported seeing significantly better student behaviors and interactions in their classrooms compared to control teachers. I've had less behavior problems. I've had so much less drama, less infighting. I've had less kids who come to the classroom and refuse to do anything than I've ever had before. That's a nightmare for teachers when children say, I'm not going to do it no matter what you say. I'm just not. I think it's a lot to do with the relationships that we build. They know you care about them, so they want to show that they care about you too. And I know Jean is going to talk about that. Next time, on tomorrow actually, we'll talk about student attitudes and behaviors, the next few sections that we saw in the student survey through their voices on that student survey. But basically, this is how BAR gets results. We start with the teachers and end with the students. And I will turn it over to my coworker, Rob.
Hello, everybody. I'm Rob Metz. I'm the Deputy Director of BAR Center. I had a long career as a teacher, principal, and school administrator. And I just wanted to share a couple of anecdotes today about this mediation model. The first is that we have an outside evaluator, the American Institutes for Research, that crunches all of our numbers for us and looks at all of our data. And they shared with us this year something that really made an impression on me, that if you simplify this down into a very simple process, that relationships come first. And the relationships make it possible to engage students. And once students are engaged, you can expect more of them. You can expect the rigor. And once that happens, their academics improve. Many times when I'm visiting with schools across the United States, they're jumping from relationships straight to higher expectation, or they're raising expectation without having relationships and engagement built in first. I think one of the things that makes BAR so successful is that, again, it goes in the right order from left to right, where we can help almost every adult in a school build better relationships with students, and students with one another, and the adults with one another. and then use those relationships to increase engagement. And once students are engaged, they will do almost anything for you. Then you can increase the rigor. They turn in an assignment that's not good enough, you can turn it back and say, I want you to redo this section, and they'll do it because there's a relationship first and they're engaged. Then they'll rise to the occasion and increase the level of rigor. In my old high school, we had a very diverse group of students, and we had very, very high level courses, advanced placement, international baccalaureate courses. We had sort of middle of the road courses, and we had what we called support courses. And those were for students that were reading usually 2 to 3 grade levels below their grade level that they were placed in. And we could get students in the right level. But I always said that we almost never had a student fail a class because they weren't smart enough. There was almost always a non-academic reason that they were failing a class. They weren't attending. They were getting in trouble. They weren't turning in assignments. Their relationship with the other students and the teacher were poor. There was something getting in the way. It wasn't that they weren't capable. And it wasn't until we really focused on building these 3 different types of relationships that we were able to overcome those obstacles. It's really interesting that we have Snowden on today, a school in Boston that's about to share, because one of the things that sticks with me is I saw an interview of a student at their high school, Snowden High School, and he was talking about the student-to-student relationships in their school. We have a very specific way of building these relationships. And his comment was, I would never bully anyone in my grade level. And if anyone was being bullied in my grade level, I would stand up for them, because we're a team, we're a group, we're one. We're together as a group, as a grade level. We know each other, we support each other. And I can tell you that does not happen by accident. That happens because of the talented people at that school, but also because they're placing an emphasis on building these relationships. Howard said at the beginning of this webinar that these things don't happen by accident, and I can verify that. BAR provides a very structured, organized, systematic way to cause these relationships to be built that lead to engagement, that lead to higher expectation, that lead to academic outcomes. Next slide, please. We're going to take just a moment here to provide some space. If there are any other questions, please just jump on and ask them, or put them in the chat box and we'll address them.
And I want to make sure we also address Howard's question, which once again was kind of small block meetings when they happen. Janice, do you want to talk about that a little bit? And then I know Jean, you'll probably talk about when your team meets, but Janice, do you want to address that a little bit?
Sure. So I think there may have been a little bit of confusion between, I said I-times happen during classes. So the teachers are doing I-times for the students during those core classes. The block meetings have to happen during what we call the teacher prep time. So I'm not sure what translates to your system, but all of our teachers have some prep time during the day, right? When they're prepping for their classes. And most of our principals have been able to work a way to give the teachers that time to meet. So their students are all off doing their what we call the elective classes, the musics, the arts, the PE. And so the teachers don't have their students during that time, and they're able to collaborate with each other. It does take some work on the master schedule up front. So we usually start working with a school in the spring before they start that fall, so that they can do the scheduling to allow for these meetings to occur. If a school can't change their schedule, we still work with them, and these meetings can happen before school or after school. Usually they just do about 1 year of the meetings that way and decide they're going to find a way to change their schedule, because we all know that meetings before and after school are not nearly as efficient as ones that happen during the day. So that is the preference, that those meetings happen during the school day. And Christopher, I saw that you had a question. Oh, did you put it in the chat box? Okay, thumbs up. Christopher said, I'm surprised that the relationships with parents didn't improve. Can you speak to this, please? I'll pass that to you, Anu.
Yeah, what I want to say is that they did improve. They just were not statistically significantly different between the groups. But the bar teachers did have higher levels of quality of interaction with parents than the control teachers. It just didn't achieve that level of statistical significance. And anecdotally, I will tell you that what I hear is that the bar coaches and bar teachers are taught very specific strategies regarding how to contact parents and how to speak with them effectively. We hear so often that teachers will say, well, I called home, but nobody was there. I emailed, but I didn't get a response. Bar teachers don't take that at face value. They persist, and they often will bring parents in to meet with the group of the teachers that are meeting as a group, or what we call a team or a block, to discuss strategies with the students.
Thank you. That's
Gina,
fine.
Raquel, do you want to speak to either of those questions? How you're able to schedule in meeting time for your teachers, or the ways in which you've seen family engagement change through BAR?
Yeah, I'll tackle the first question about schedules, and Raquel is kind of our mastermind of parent engagement, and so she can speak to the second one. First off, I just want to say it's really great to be here. I actually lived as a child in Surrey, and I went to the American Community School in Cobham, so it's great to connect with folks from the UK. So in terms of scheduling, what we did was, if you're going to utilize the BAR program, it's really important to build that into your planning pretty early on the year before, because it's really going to impact the construction of your schedule for students and staff the following year. What we were able to do, and this was actually one of the selling points that we had for teachers, was we were able to double the amount of time that they had to collaborate in terms of meeting time during their workday when we initially started. So we went from having one hour team meeting for each team per week to having 2 1-hour team meetings for any of the grade levels that were doing BAR, and we built that in long ahead of time. Number one, to engage the teachers, because the idea that they would have more time to focus on student learning together in a group was appealing to them, but also we needed to make sure that we were able to configure the student schedules to allow teachers to meet twice a week. And so the first year we did it, we had the small block meeting on Friday and the large block meeting on Monday. So that we found that having the 2 meetings relatively close together gave teachers the opportunity to plan field trips or do any of the other housekeeping things they needed to do, and then to select the students to discuss in a larger meeting when counselors, administrators, and other partners who were involved in providing services were available to collaborate with the students. And with that, I'll let Raquel introduce herself, and then she can talk a little bit about how BAR supports parent engagement.
Hi, hello everyone. Just some quick notes about what we learned with the intentionality with family relationships. So my role is Director of Data and Student Achievement, and I work specifically with 1 grade level within BAR. And one of the things that I think really helped us was thinking about the intentional relationships and the data. The data was huge because you can't really engage families if you don't know who they are, right? So the data was huge with that, because first we needed to identify who are our families, right? What makes up the demographics of our specific grade level? And then what is the best way to communicate with them, right? So one thing we realized within the 9th grade team that time was we had a lot of Spanish speaking families who weren't the most apt in terms of digital literacy. So we had to really think about ways, what are the best ways that we can engage these families to be able to come into the school building, because they were not going to be the families necessarily that were going to be logging on to the computer, right? So some things we did with breakfasts. We thought about ways of having activities where they were being brought into the school and things like that. So I think the foundational pieces of the way the BAR model works were a huge piece in thinking about how to engage families versus the what, because I think oftentimes people like to think about activities first without really thinking, is this activity the best for the specific group of people that we're working with? So I think that those were some of kind of the major learning curves that we had as a team.
Yeah, another thing I would say is a lot of times our parents are socialized that they hear from us when their child is doing something wrong, right? Or They hear from us when, when they're academically, they're not where they should be. And the fact that we had the opportunity to, work in teams where we could always decide, all right, who has the best relationship with the student, who knows the most about the student. Oftentimes that would be also the person on the team who would reach out to the parent. And parents respond to you differently when they know you really know and care for their kid. They really do.
Yeah, and one thing just about that, even today I'm in the school building and we've gone remote. When I tell you the number of families of that team in 9th grade who I have on my phone, who often families just need someone that I know when I call, especially if they don't speak English as a first language. When I call, one, you will answer, and two, you will help me get the answer that I need. Even if you don't know it, they know, right? And for so many families, especially first generation families, I'm a first generation student, so I know that. My mom and dad were not the kind of people who were going to show up at the school, right? Because often they would not be met with people who looked like them or could speak in their language, right? So they need someone, even if they're not someone who looks like them, but someone who they know they have a connection. So it's almost like bar for families too, right? What is that family's connection to the school? And are we only leveraging that relationship when we need them versus when we want to just inform them or invite them or thank them for their engagement? So those are things that we've been thinking about.
And I'll say that in addition, I agree with 100% with what Raquel said. In addition, as the students become, better known and less anonymous, so do their parents, right? And you get to know the parents better, through the changes in the kind of conversation that you have when you're talking about things that you notice about the child, or ways that you've seen their attendance or their engagement shift, or when you call them to say, look, like we had this intervention plan, and we want to let you know we're really seeing a lot of success. So thank you for working with us and supporting us. It's I think that it has really helped us kind of reframe the relationship between us as parents, and now we really engage as partners. And we're able to say, here's the information that we're seeing. Here's what we think needs to happen. Let's work together to support those changes.
Thank you both so much. One more question. What are the strategies that get the staff and the students together? Do bar coaches get special training? I know Jean and Raquel are going to speak to some specific strategies here in just a minute, so I'll let them speak to that when we get to their slides in just a few slides. Bar coaches do get very intensive ongoing training. So when they first come on, they receive an initial training, and then they receive ongoing training from both myself, Christina, who is also on this call, you guys heard from her on Monday, and they have a mentor for each of their schools. Coaching to the bar model is, because it's a systems change, it's not a simple thing that you can just pick up the phone and coach to. And so we provide our coaches with a lot of support for really the first year that they're doing that coaching. So to make sure that they really learn and understand what that looks like. And so Ari, I'm gonna ask you to go to the next slide. You can see Jean, for you guys who were on the webinar on Monday, you saw the picture of him greeting his students, and we talked about that. It's a beautiful form of relationships. When you go visit Jean at his school, he leaves his office and greets students between every class, which he's the only principal I've ever seen do that in all the schools I've ever been to. And he knows everyone, like when you walk around the blocks of his school, he knows everyone who sells art or is making sandwiches, or it's just a really beautiful model for the students. But relationships and data, we do always come back to those two things. And then today we're going to dig in. Ari, you can go ahead to the next one. Today we're going to dig into that staff to student, and you're going to get to hear from Jean and Raquel, who, as you've already heard, are exemplary at these staff to student relationships. On Monday, for those of you who weren't able to join us, we did talk about staff to staff. That is a really important part of our culture building also, is that we have to be modeling those relationships as staff, and we have to be filling our cup, as it were, before we can fill the student's cup. We have to make sure that our staff is taken care of. And then tomorrow we'll be zooming in on student-to-student relationships, which is that third really vital piece of culture building at your school. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Gina and Raquel to talk about some of the work that they're doing and the strategies that they use in their school.
So yeah, this is one of our favorite topics to talk about. Our school we're a Boston public school. So we're an urban high school, but we're located in a commercial district. So our neighbors are, we don't live our school is not in the same neighborhood where our kids live. Our neighbors are restaurants, very expensive shops and bars. But our students, we serve a lot of students that are economically disadvantaged. So there's a real part of our work is kind of managing the relationship between a very kind of, I would say, upscale neighborhood, and students whose only access to the neighborhood is because our school is here. And so we began implementing BAR in 2017, largely because we had really, really high failure rates comparatively to other Boston public high schools. And our students actually performed at a level that was higher than a lot of schools, but our kids were still failing their classes, which is what really motivated us to get involved with a new way to support students and making sure that they were successful in our context. And in this picture, this is right outside my office, which is right on the inside of the front door. Being a school in a city, we don't have metal detectors or any of these things. And so kids are coming in and out. And I think that being there provides two really important purposes. Number one, I'm able to see who's coming and going in the building. And number two, you get that very regular, check-in, fist bump, hello, and visibility where you can really, really be present in the lives of the students, which is, not as easy if you're not a teacher. And you can get really good interactions and check-ins and opportunities to say hello to kids in the morning, the afternoon, and during the day. So, and I think that one of the things that I learned as a teacher, but I think has really taken on new meaning for me as a school leader is a very simple fact that kids do not care what you know until they know that you care. And I think that relationships are the bridges, on which we build the foundation of their education. Many students, come to school and they're drivers for coming to school. And I was a biology teacher. And so I would say that, the kids might not come for photosynthesis, but they are going to come because they have a relationship with the people in the building, who in many cases are some of the really stable adults that they have in their lives. And so I think that for, what the BAR model, really helps us do in a way that's systematic and really intentional is it allows our teacher teams to be responsive to changes that they notice in students. It also allows us to leverage, in a team of teachers, if you put the kids in cohorts where they all share the same teachers, you're able to really kind of leverage the expertise, knowledge, awareness, and observation of an entire group of staff that are supporting a single group of students. For administrators, I think that really, it is you have to be more intentional to build relationships with students because I know at a lot of schools, and some days my school feels like this too, the kids that I build relationships with are the ones who are getting in trouble and being sent to speak to me, right? And so you want to make sure that you're also getting opportunities to build relationships, in ways that are neutral or ways that are positive. And so I find that greeting kids at the front door is really important because if it's raining, if it's snowing, if they've had a long morning, if you're able to get that first interaction right, I think it can create ripple effects, that will carry them through the rest of the day. And if you're able to greet 200 kids and you're able to have 200 positive interactions, right? I think there's a multiplier effect. I don't have the math on that, but it's something that I think you can feel palpably in the day. One thing I try to do is I try to learn students' names and one thing about each student. If I know a student is into sneakers, every day I can comment on their shoes. If I know that they're into video games, I can give them my gamer tag and say, I'll see you on PlayStation. It's figuring out what is the entry point for each relationship. What is it the thing that they can care about, that can be a place of connection for you. The other thing is, one of the most important things I ever did when I was in high school is I read a book by Dale Carnegie called How to Win Friends and Influence People. And one of the things that was really, really important was to give compliments, right? When people come in, you say something nice about them when you say hello. And those things do have an additive effect. I mean, it's small, and but I think you can take it for granted. And I think that when you're having a quick interaction with someone, saying something positive about their something that they did or something that they're wearing in a way that's respectful, I think it can go a long way. The next thing I'll say is that in terms of building relationships with kids, there are going to be other adults in your school that will have relationships with students, particularly athletic coaches. And one of the things that I think has really made a difference for us is we hire our athletics coaches to work in our school as teachers or as community field coordinators or deans of students if we can, because we're able to leverage that coaching relationship during the school day.
So in thinking about how we care for students and in what ways we're thoughtful in doing that, we had a few things in terms of like values, and thinking about values that are not just things that are posted around the building, right? But the values are in action every day at the school, and that you're using them when you're talking about behavior, when you're talking about material in class. So for example, we are an IB school, and sometimes we'll use the IB learner profiles of being a risk taker, or being an inquirer, or being reflective within our conversations with students. And also I try to urge my teachers that even in a math class or in an ELA class, when you're talking about a character or something, in what ways was this character reflective? In which way was this character a risk taker? And in which ways are you a risk taker or reflective in that way? So that's one thing. This idea of being a warm demander, right, which has become more and more popular, right, which is you have a high expectation for a student, but they also feel valued and feel like that bar can be met with your support. That's really important. And also we think about conversations, and then we talk about conversations, we make it about the behavior, right? Focus on the behavior, not necessarily the story of the student. Because oftentimes as educators, we're so invested in the story of the student, and this happened, and there's a long story that led us to where we are today, which is all great. But sometimes within a meeting time, in terms of like logistics, you have to get to what is the one thing that you want to address with that student that you want to change tomorrow. And as a team, how are we all working to change that one behavior right now? Because sometimes you can get lost in the story, and then you waste time and don't see, because you're so busy talking about the background that you're not talking about the actual issue at the moment. So we noticed some of those things. And then the other thing we had was about ways that we do this in the next slide. So
yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to talk about little tweaks that we like to do. I know Mr. Roundtree, who's in the picture there, he attends many sporting events, and as we know, any educator, if you go to a kid's game and they see you, they're going to acknowledge it, right? Whether they say it to your face or they say it to their parent, when they get home, they know that you went. That's very huge. Real opportunities to listen to input. So I'll give an example that's going on right now. Very real example. Mr. Roundtree, I hope you don't mind me mentioning this. So one challenge that we're facing right now with some teachers is the camera issue on Zoom, right? Some teachers feel like they want students to have their cameras on because it leads to engagement. As administrators, we understand that there are a huge range of reasons why students will not have their cameras on, and some of them are equity reasons, right? I'm not inviting you into my home because maybe my home is not a place that I want to share with you right now, right? So we thought about this issue. We've been very, very intentional about using the bar, now that we're bar experts. And what we did was, first, we had a student listening session where students talked about why they felt they wanted their cameras on or off, or how it impacts their listening and their learning rather. We did a poll with families. Do families want it on, right? And then we went back to teachers. What teachers wanted from us was give an edict, give a rule. And oftentimes when you think about relationships and you think about data, you have to be able to present to them, this is the situation that we have, and this is how we're thinking about moving forward. So that's a good example of one thing that we've done now. And then finally, the restorative practices, where when something happens, when a relationship is broken in some ways between an adult and a child in the building, it is very important that that relationship is mended before that student walks back into that classroom, and that student feels like I am now in a good place with an adult who we may have had an awkward or hurtful interaction with. I don't know, Mr. Roundtree, if there's anything else that you wanted to add on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the restorative piece you know, is super important. And also I would just say the last thing I'd say about the model is while most of us in here, I think, like really enjoy thinking of data and thinking about like how studying data can lead to more positive results for students. There are a lot of folks who the word data is kind of a turnoff. So what I like to say in my school is we call them facts about student learning, right? Or the facts about student experience. Well, the facts about our student experience is that you know 70% of them are coming on time and 30% of them are not, right? And I think if you, for anyone who does not lean in to conversations around data, just rephrase them as facts, and it makes it, I think, easier to have those conversations for those folks. And the last thing I say is also incentives work better than punishments. We, particularly around attendance, that's something that we've really focused on. And we had this, you know, plan where we would have like after school detention for kids who came late. And, you know, we would have, you know, a lot of kids would be responsible to make up their time and the room was full and we would have people there all the time. And, you know, what we learned was when we incentivized on-time behavior through homeroom competitions, through, you know, making contracts with kids where they could earn sneakers, we found that to be a better driver of improvement than, you know, than punishments. And also in terms of building relationships, you have to really be intentional about what you schedule. We do field days, which are just intentional fun days for students and staff. The I-times are really important because we actually schedule those during our academic classes. Now this year we have advisories, but before, you know, we would schedule them during our academic classes so that each teacher got a chance to do an I-time with each group of kids. We've included staff versus student sporting events and the parent engagement breakfast that we do in the beginning of the year. But I want to be very clear that a lot of these things have stemmed from what we've learned about relationships and connection through the bar process. And all of these things are necessary to kind of build the type of environment that's going to be inviting and nurturing for your students and staff.
Jean, can you talk a little bit about, back to Howard's question at the beginning, a little bit about how you have worked with staff who haven't maybe been as excited to do this work as other staff? And then I also see that we have a question in the chat box from Mr. Hanscomb about the application of BAR. And maybe Angie, you can take that question after Jean has a chance to address this staff engagement question.
So yeah, so we have a very veteran staff, you know, at Snowden, and coming in, I think that with veteran staff, I think you can trust that the majority of the folks understand like the basics of instruction, and we have a hardworking staff. But I will say that that one difference between, you know, teachers who are newer to the profession and teachers who have been doing it for 10, 15, 20 years is that sometimes veteran teachers are more resistant to doing things that are new when they feel like they have things that have worked. Particularly also if they're at a school and they've been accustomed to policies, practices, procedures, and even schedules. Some of these things are kind of hard to shift. And so really what we did was you have to know going into it that the first, you know, 3 to 5 months are really learning, right? You're going to be really learning, you know, the very specific practices that make up BAR. And what I'll say with the selling point for us with the staff was more meeting time to collaborate. But also when we went through the BAR training, a lot of the staff said, oh, well, this isn't anything new. Like, we know that you should do these things, you know, and that's actually the best part of the BAR program is you're not selling them on something that is, you know, that is a collection of, you know, new ideas, you know, that they haven't experienced before. I think, you know, what BAR does is it creates systems of the things that we know work and are important. And they make it so that they're very directly applicable, you know, to your context, and you're able to find ways to group kids and group staff. And then you've got very specific, you know, practices and meeting structures, you know, that are very helpful, because we would have meetings, but they weren't as productive as they might have been. And what we were able to do is, you know, during the the small block meeting, we would determine, hey, these are the 8 to 10 kids, you know, that we're going to, you know, talk about in our large block meeting and plan interventions for. And then in the very beginning, we'd have that list of 10 kids, and we would get to 3, we would get to 4. But as we developed our ability to start off by focusing on their strengths, then talk about their connection to school, what our concerns were, select a goal, and then plan an intervention that was an interdisciplinary intervention between teachers that involved counselors and administrators, we were able to go from, hey, you know, the first month we were able to get to 3 kids, then we were getting to 5, then we were getting to 8. And as we were able to, you know, to get better at the process, we also started to see results. So they would see kids that were coming late 5 days a week that were now only coming late once per week, right? And that was also what really cemented the buy-in from the teachers, when they can see that things, you know, can change. And I think in our first year, I remember, because the 9th grade team, they're a very warm demanders, warm group, but, you know, they are kind of set in their ways. And I remember that each one of them kind of had a moment where they had the aha moment where, you know, they're like, you know what, this kid is now in a different place, right? And some people, you know, they had that moment sooner. Others had it a little bit later, but we haven't had any teams where folks haven't had those moments, right? And now I feel like, you know, if we were to try to take this away and not do this, we would have a lot of teachers that would be kind of like, hold up, like, this is how we do things.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I also did bar as a person in the school. And I will say for me, I always had a belief since I started teaching that students could change. The longer I taught, the less I believed that my colleagues could change. And so I got caught into this very negative behavior that other teachers could not change. And when we started doing bar, I fully was into that belief. And I very slowly started to see my colleagues change as we did bar. And it really caused me to be reflective and to say, wait a minute, what's happened to my belief system that I think students are capable of change, but not adults? And so I remember that moment where I stepped back and was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I think this about my colleagues. And maybe it's accurate sometimes, but I really saw them start to change through the bar work. And it sometimes it took a couple years. It wasn't always like, oh, overnight they had this change. But I think that's what starts to happen, is that mental shift. So Angie, I want to make sure I think it's Graham. I don't know if that's the correct pronunciation.
Can I add just one other thing?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
So the last thing I'll add about this is, when I was in grad school, you learn a lot in grad school, but you have a couple things that really stick in your head. So there's a researcher named Thomas Guskey, and he had a theory about how teachers actually change their beliefs. And the way for teachers to change their beliefs is you have to change their practices first, provide them with evidence that the practices were effective, and then the beliefs will change after that, right? And so if the folks are not really convinced from the start, let them not be convinced, really focusing on just changing the practices. And then, really celebrating big early wins, celebrate the small wins, right? The things that will happen quickly. And then after they see the evidence, then their beliefs will shift.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Jean, thank you so much for that. I'll answer Graham's question a bit, and we can always do more offline, as well as then pass it to Beth to talk a little bit just about elementary application, because just to make sure that we're seeing this, because I think it ties into this question. So the extent the application is context specific, that's really been what our 22 years of research has been able to show, is that we are equally effective in all these different settings. We're in 170 schools in the United States. We have charter schools, we have high performing schools, we have schools that are struggling, but this training, as well as centering the staff around this shared vocabulary, shared belief system, and the systemic change, every single one of our schools is having concrete data / facts that are able to demonstrate the changes occurring. So right now, every school we've worked with, they've had notable changes within a year to be able to say this new system is really making notable shifts. What our tagline is a really important part of our belief system. So we talk about same teachers. So we're not replacing teachers. We're not adding new staff in. We're saying the teachers there, same students, really means each and every student. So we're looking at all students, running that data in mass, but then also by these smaller groups to say where is the, the students that are not being as successful, but those better results. We are constantly doing PDSA cycles, but when we say we're teaching the school to do it. That's been a really, really kind of critical piece. So both the pillars as well as the practices, we have now had equal application as we have, gone first from 9th grade, then to 6-12, and then we transitioned down to kindergarten, that we're finding that same level of resonance. I think that in terms of the data or what people are looking for to change, that's where the variability has come in. But in terms of the systemic approach and getting everybody, kind of moving forward, that's been the consistent. So like we probably had the most variability when you move from to an elementary. So, and kind of with that, I'll have Beth talk a little about elementary, but what the school prioritizes, because back to that very first question, we go to the school to say, what are you looking for a change? What are the things that you value, your community values? And then subsequently, what are the data that indicates that you're either being successful or not? So with that, Beth, I'll have you talk a little bit about elementary.
Thanks, Angie. A piece I want to touch on in terms of the staff to student relationship building is the U-Time or I-Time curriculum component to the BAR model. The U-Time, I-Time, it is our SEL curriculum. But what makes our SEL curriculum different from other SEL curriculums is really two centered things. Number one, we're not teaching an SEL concept in terms of wanting to have a cognitive understanding. We're actually using these lessons to use that SEL component and build relationships amongst the teachers and the students. So if we're doing a lesson on commonalities, the teacher's not going to instruct necessarily just what a commonality is, but the entire lesson is going to be built around having students find commonalities within each other as well as with the teacher. And that leads to the second piece in that the U-Times and I-Times are not instructional by nature, but facilitative. So the teacher is actually participating in the activities at the same level as the students. So when there's an interview piece, that teacher is paired up with another student and doing the same interview and same activity, and then the same share out to everybody. So the students really see that teacher as an equal, and they are learning as much about that teacher as they are about each other. And when teachers are using these, we also really are guiding them to be able to use these lessons to collect qualitative data. So often teachers are only looking at numbers in terms of test scores and assignment completion. This is a chance for teachers to actually take a step out from that academic lens and really be able to look at that student and how are they interacting within those lessons. So for example, going back to that commonalities lesson, if they're noticing that in the activity, a student is not being able to get out of their chair to show that they had a connection with another student or staff in that room, that's information for that teacher to know that student is not having connections within the class. If there are lessons and a student is hesitant to share, or a student is oversharing, all of those different pieces are ways for teachers to be able to take that into their instruction and be able to figure out, am I attending to those needs of the student and not just the cognitive needs? So it really is leaning into guiding teachers to figure out how to use that qualitative and that positive intentional relationship building information to help better drive their instruction. I would just, I know we're short on time, but I would just share that at one of our schools, a teacher shared with me that she actually was really known to be the relationships teacher at the school. That is what she was known for. Her relationship with the students, her relationship with the teachers, that's what she really kind of prided herself on in terms of how she presented in the school. And she shared that it wasn't until that she was doing BAR that she actually started to really know her students. And by really knowing her students at a level that she never had before, she said her instruction was better because for the first time, it was being driven by that data of who her students were rather than just by the curriculum pieces that she has always followed. So it really shows that the intentional positive relationships piece is just as important as any of the other academic teachings that the teachers are doing within their class. Any questions?
No, I think that's actually really helpful, and I want to make sure we have time for this. Tony, you want to bring us home?
Sure. I just want to say Beth gave a really good explanation about I times and U times, and that I times are secondary and U times are in the elementary, and we're looking at they're based in the 40 developmental assets, just so you know, looking at those 8 particular categories, and so developing students. So here's one particular I time that we have. It's called Rainbow in the Clouds for time. This is from our volume 3, lesson 1. There are 3 volumes, approximately 100 developed lessons that are pre-medi and read for our particular schools, and understanding, as which I think is important, Beth said, is about collecting that qualitative data. I just want to echo here, when you look at this lesson and you're going to hear, it's what are those qualitative data, the stressors, right? We're looking at their joys, the responsibilities of students, what they have going on in their life, and making that connection so we can triangulate our quantitative and qualitative data. And so what you can see here is this lesson looks at recognizing individuals who can provide support and kindness for our participants, right? To say what's going on when they're going through challenges, right? That's a big piece of this lesson. The second piece is recognizing how we can support each other, whether that's staff to students, right? And students supporting each other, continuing on building those relationships, and then establishing what we would call our classroom norms and rules. And I'm going to show you a very quick video. I don't know if you can hear it, but I can't hear it. But just in case
Sorry, you
anybody
have
else
to
can.
unmute. All right, you have to unmute your Zoom.
I think
Sorry about that.
time to charm. No worries, Ari. We got this.
It was all disappearing on me. Here we go.
There's an African American song, 19th century, which is so great. It says, when it looked like the sun wasn't gonna shine anymore, God put a rainbow in the clouds. Imagine. And I've had so many rainbows in my clouds. I had a lot of clouds, but I have had so many rainbows. And one of the things I do when I step up on a stage, when I stand up to translate, when I go to teach my classes, when I go to direct a movie, I bring everyone who has ever been kind to me with me. Black, white, Asian, Spanish-speaking, Native American, gay, straight, everybody. I say, come with me. I'm going on the stage. Come with me, I need you now. Long dead, you see? So I don't ever feel I have no help. I've had rainbows in my clouds. And the thing to do, it seems to me, is to prepare yourself so that you can be a rainbow in somebody else's cloud. Somebody who may not look like you, may not call God the same name you call God, if they call God at all, you see? And may not eat the same dishes prepared the way you do, may not dance your dances or speak your language, but be a blessing to somebody. That's what I think.
So as you can see here, Dr. Maya Angelou talks about having clouds and what's going on in our lives. And just like students have things going on and staff as well, this is when you take the opportunity as a teacher leading that particular classroom and facilitate this lesson. And here you would talk to students about what's going on. How can we make a difference and be a particular cloud in somebody else's while they're cloudy? How can we support different individuals? That's by understanding, respecting diversity, respecting time, and understanding what our schools are going through and what our students are going through. And what you can see is in here is a lesson. And the lesson is trying to collect that qualitative data, what we have for our students. This is the intentionality. We talked about data, right? And we talked about relationships. This is the intentionality of moving forward and learning, as Beth said, about the teacher and the student. If you go to the next slide, you can see how different schools across the nation have created their rainbow in the clouds. Some have drawn them on the ground, some have used different color Post-its, some have put them up in schools, and some have shown them throughout the way. And these are different things that you'll see about how individual students and staff members in that particular classroom can make a difference for students. This can be visually adapted. During COVID, we're looking at different adaptations. We're uploading different programs. We're doing sort of remote calls, and we're sharing and elbow teaching with each other. And so these are different ways that we're trying to experience what's taking place. It's important to know that when we're using I and U times, we are collecting that data. I just want to go. And you can't teach a child you don't know. And this is one of the first steps of understanding who we're dealing with, because I think Howard and I think Christopher said it best, is when we're looking at our students, right? How do you calibrate this for you? So when you're looking at what your clouds are, you're going to find out locally to your school. And when you can find out the resources you have, that's what's important, right? And you made a note, I think it's called Net about risk reward. And I think it talked about realities. And that's what this is, right? Our risk of doing these lessons. The reward is once you find out all the information, you can determine the realities of your classrooms and of your school. And now you can move forward and making sure you're mitigating those experiences. And then throughout the process, we'll find out. And this builds a better relationship. Eugene talked about practice. Once you put in the practice of doing intentional relationships, you'll begin to change the belief of your students. You'll begin to change the belief of your staffs. And you'll begin to see systemic change in your school, which I think is important. Any questions? I know we had some time, but I don't want to go over too much. Okay.
Thank you so much, Tony. So we will be sending you all the presentation for today. We will also send you that iTime as a free resource so that you can really see what the lesson looks like, see what an iTime would look like if you were to do it in your classrooms. But are there any final questions today? All right, Howard, I'll pass it back to you.
Okay, thanks very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I got a lot out of this actually, because I very much took Jean's point that much of this isn't strange to teachers. They would have heard about positive behavior management and so on. But in most schools, it happens on an individual basis. It isn't systemic. And I think this is one of the really interesting things. And without that systematic intentionality, often the whole school doesn't get the cultural boost that you do get when it is systemic. So I think that was one of the very interesting things. And then I also think iTime is very interesting, and I'd like to learn a lot more about how you actually do it. You know, I'd like to get to the nitty gritty of iTime and U-time. But one very interesting and I think very different aspect is professionals here aren't encouraged to give out too much about their personal lives to students. And that seems something that's very different with the American system. You know, that sense of equality between staff and student or even younger pupil, that very much is not something that's culturally resonant here. But it does seem quite important.
But you know, Howard, I want to touch on that last piece. It's so interesting because I would say that is still true in the United States in terms of that hierarchy. We do coach on what's appropriate to share and not to share. What our research has continued to find out, if in fact there's not an authentic relationship and if that student does not have a sense of that teacher as a human, not just an instructor, that ability to forge a relationship is really mitigated. So what we had initially found is if in fact the teacher shares, you know, and once again, we're talking appropriate things like I like to jog, but like things besides I'm just a math teacher, that humanizing experience has been shown to be a really critical factor in the student then bonding with the school and trusting and then being able to learn those other pieces. But happy to discuss that more, because that is both a legitimate barrier in terms of when you go to adults and you're like, you need to facilitate this lesson, not teach that lesson. So much of our training and professional development is about the facilitation of I times and U times. And that, once again, this can't be, I'm just teaching you to be caring. You need to know something about me also. And that has really been a critical piece of the work. So that's a conversation of absolutely for another day, or for maybe for tomorrow, but both the barrier we deal with, as well as a lot of our professional development is around that.
Great. Okay, well, maybe next session we can explore what constitutes an authentic relationship a little bit more, and perhaps also what the coaches do that's so special, because there is lots of coaching initiatives in the UK, but they don't seem to be having the results you're having. So I'd like to know a little bit more about what the coaches actually are taught and what they deliver to schools. So maybe we can include that for tomorrow as well.
Sounds great.
Okay, thanks everybody for coming. Hope you all can make the last session, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Thank you, really interesting.